What does the Globalist Great Reset and the United Nations Charter 75th anniversary have in common? Well, the answer is one of the most ominous end-time prophecies in the Bible, and we will discuss it on this edition of End of the Age. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. Thank you so much for joining me on this edition of End of the Age. I'm going to be talking about the Great Reset. Many of you have heard about it. Maybe some of you haven't. But on October 23rd, Time magazine thought it important enough to dedicate an entire issue of their magazine to this little-known but very radical globalist quest known as the Great Reset. Not the Great Restart, but a total reset. And then the United Nations is also celebrating its 75th anniversary. So the question is, what do these things have in common? Well, it's the ongoing fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old prophecy of really the end-time socialistic world government that the Antichrist will rule over just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. World government. They're all working together. The World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, all of these globalists working together to create a world governing body. But they do not like capitalism. So they need to change it. But if they just said, hey, we're trying to implement socialism, there would be a lot of people that would buck against that. So what they've said is we need to move away from certain types of capitalism, like shareholder capitalism or the heads of businesses, and we need to go to stakeholder capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism would be for the good of all of society, right? Leaning in a socialistic direction. Even though they're calling it stakeholder capitalism, it's just a veil for what they're really trying to do. So let's get off into some details. The Median, they ran an article, the globalist elite's socialistic plan is revealed. They call it the Great Reset. So there's this new progressive initiative going around that is the most ambitious, radical plan that we've seen in years. And almost no one is paying attention to it. Now, I know some of you guys are, but most everybody, they're like the Great Reset. What in the world are you guys talking about? Well, for years, progressive groups have been using climate change, the propaganda from the United Nations, to advocate for more socialist policies, but now they're using COVID-19, this crisis, which, hey, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Well, they're using it for this ambitious project, and the plan is called the Great Reset, and it comes from the World Economic Forum. Earlier in June, many of you will remember this, there was a meeting held by the World Economic Forum, and it featured some of the world's most powerful leaders. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who is a socialist, Prince Charles, the director of the International Monetary Fund, the CEO of BP, British Petroleum, the president of Microsoft, the China Green Finance Committee. That's just to name a few. Well, at the meeting, they announced their plan to reset the world. And in his opening remarks, the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, he stated this. Listen very closely. Every country, from the United States to China, must participate. And every industry, from oil and gas to tech, must be transformed. The pandemic represents a rare, narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. So we're going to use this COVID-19 pandemic as an opportunity to reset the world. So what he's saying. And he said the purpose of the Great Reset isn't merely to enact policies that would lead to additional wealth redistribution. He didn't say it's not wealth redistribution. He said it's not only this, which is one of the major planks of socialism, but rather to completely overhaul the world's existing structures and institutions. So COVID-19 killing hundreds of thousands of people, they say this is a great opportunity for us to have a global reset. I mean, think about that. They say, in short, we need a global reset of capitalism. Why? Because they're trying to implement a socialistic system globally. The international community, the ideology, political ideology of the international community is socialism. You wonder why socialism is being pushed so hard here in America? This is why. They're leading up to a meeting in January of 2021 where they're hoping to implement this great global reset. Time magazine just devoted an entire issue to the Great Reset. We'll talk about it more when we get back.
Major internet companies are silencing and censoring Christian voices online. These companies are trying to control what you see and hear. Almost 200 videos of ours have been marked as restricted online right now. That's why we launched End of the Age Plus, a platform where the truth won't be censored, a platform where we can preach the message of the gospel. When you subscribe to End of the Age Plus today for just $12.99 a month, you can watch all of our content in a secure, easy-to-view way from your favorite device. When you go to watch.endtime.com and subscribe, you'll get instant access to all of our teaching resources, including Revelation, the Unveiling of Jesus Christ, Understanding the End Time, Endtime magazine, and so much more. We will not censor our message to comply with what the world deems as politically correct. Go to watch.endtime.com right now or search End of the Age Plus in the App Store or Google Play.
We've seen Bible prophecy fulfilled like never before. From the halls of the United Nations to the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, End Time Ministries continues to reveal the Bible prophecy in the news headlines around the world every day. Whether it's through our broadcast or online at our Jerusalem Prophecy College, your gifts enable us to put vital materials in the hands of those who need it most. Because of you, we continue to replace fear with faith in the hearts of Christians around the world. We will continue to see prophecy come to pass at an even swifter pace. We need your support. Your donation of any amount enables us to continue to broadcast and be a voice in the ever-growing censored media. To become a partner or give a one-time gift, visit endtime.com or call 1-800-END-TIME right now. That's 800-363-8463. Go online now. Visit endtime.com.
So, the Median reports that this meeting of the World Economic Forum is scheduled to take place in Davos, Switzerland, January of 2021. And at that time, the group is going to release its full initiative to reshape our world. Now, at this point, much of it's unknown about the full agenda, and because they haven't released it yet. But let me share with you what's known on the topic so far. And it's clear that this is a plan for global socialism, which is it's the goals of the United Nations as well. And any of these global governing entities, World Health Organization, World Trade, they're all socialistic in their ideology, their political ideology. So let's start with the 7 key issues that this Great Reset is working on. First, shaping the economy, the economic recovery. redesigning social contracts, the social contract skills and jobs, restoring the health of the environment, developing sustainable business models, revitalizing global cooperation, strengthening regional development, and finally, harnessing the fourth industrial revolution. Now, what does all that mean? You say, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, it is. But it's a laundry list of policies that are progressive and socialistic, and they've been calling for these for years. And they're calling for trillions of dollars of investments through multilateral cooperation or global governance. The World Economic Forum actually has a portion of their website devoted to global governance or world government. So according to the World Economics website, global governance is a means to manage issues that cut across national borders, whether it's a pandemic. So they say, hey, if it's started in China, goes to Europe, goes to the United States, we need a global governing entity to manage all of this because it's went across borders. So they're saying whether it's a pandemic, a financial crisis, or a geoeconomic dispute, they don't think they should let the United States govern themselves. They want to be able to govern that, and because it's across borders. So they are claiming that effective governments is essential to secure peaceful, healthy, and prosperous societies, particularly now amid the COVID-19 outbreak. So they want to keep you in fear mode here. And widespread nationalist backlash, i.e., a President Trump administration against globalization. President Trump realizes, you know, he's got his America First doctrine. He realizes we signed a Declaration of Independence. We didn't want to be under the rule of any foreign government or foreign entity. But yet we've had leaders that have signed us on to yielding up much of our sovereignty to this world governing body. Trade deals and things that are just redistributing vast amounts of wealth to overseas. So in order to deliver on their goals, the Great Reset is calling for more sufficient and stable tax revenue. That means increased taxes for the wealthy. But by the way, if you make $30,000 a year, you'll fall in the top 80% of global income earners. So, the group is also calling for carbon taxes to tackle climate change, even though human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax. And I know I say that all the time, but it's easily proven. They want the reason for global carbon taxes. Always remember this. The reason for global carbon taxes is the redistribution of wealth, because it's not going to solve anything. If you tax a business for putting off too much carbon emissions, and you say, well, we're going to tax you, you can purchase X amount of emissions that people aren't using, these different things that they use. I can't remember the term for it, but let's say an underdeveloped country isn't putting off near as much emissions. You can purchase some of their rights to those emissions and will allow you to emit more. It changes nothing about the propaganda of human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change. All it does is transfer wealth, which is one of the major planks of socialism. So, speaking of climate change, they claim that every day new evidence emerges of humanity's negative impact on the environment and of growing inequality. According to their site, global warming is creating deadlier weather patterns. Hundreds of millions of children are being deprived of access to education because of climate change. You understand, they're tying everything into it. And income inequality is on the rise as some 3.4 billion people are forced to live on less than $5.50 a day. It's on their website. And their solution is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is their blueprint for global governance, the United Nations blueprint for global governance. It's a socialistic blueprint. And the Paris Climate Agreement, which President Trump pulled us out of because he realized it was wealth redistribution from the United States to foreign entities, which, by the way, former Vice President Joe Biden is going to push us right back into that. And they're saying that that would provide an architecture for addressing these challenges. Now, this is just a small sample of how the Great Reset plans to reshape the economy, the economic recovery. But remember, this is not a recovery, it's a total reset. We want to move away from shareholders to stakeholders capitalism. So it's a total reset here. It's a move towards socialism, but it's veiled with the name of capitalism. And it's known how that they will implement these changes. It's unknown. But we do know that they're activating left-wing activists all over the world. The Hill recently reported that the 2021 Davos Summit, which is in January, just coming up here in a little over a couple months, it's going to include thousands of members of Global Shapers, the Global Shapers community, youth activists located in 14 cities across the planet. The Global Shapers program was involved in the widespread climate strikes in 2019. Remember the big one they had in New York where they let all the kids out of school? And more than 1,300 have already been trained by the Climate Reality Project. It's the highly influential, well-funded climate activist organization run by former Vice President Al Gore, who serves on the World Economic Forum's Board of Trustees. Imagine that. So the work towards this great reset is only just beginning, but its effects will leave a lasting impact on free economies and our civil liberties. And they'll use the coronavirus pandemic to get their socialist world. And so, again, the meeting is scheduled to take place in Davos, Switzerland, just a couple months from now, January 2021. And, you know, what they say is that they don't care, you know, because socialism is the ownership of all private property for the good of the common, right? Well, under this, they're saying they don't really care if you own a business as long as they can regulate it and govern what happens there. And that's how they're wanting to do this. So you can see how, I mean, that would destroy America. Imagine if you owned a business, you worked hard, and you built a business up to the point where you were making good money, you had hundreds of employees, and then the government wants to come in and regulate that and say, hey, this is right now it's on a share based economic model where the shareholders, the ones at the helm, are making most of the money, but you provide hundreds of jobs for people. You're all making money. It's what makes a capitalistic society run. What they're saying is we want it to go to a stakeholder. And what that is that rather than just the shareholders, but the people that are your workers, the people in the community, everybody is sharing from it, and it's got to be managed by government. That's the difference. And so capitalistic societies don't work in that. You would bankrupt America if we went to that kind of a model. Well, that's what they're wanting. That's one of the main things they want to implement in January 2021. So I have a question for you, everybody listening to me. I know that we're coming up to election here in 8 days. And I know that well over 50 million people have already voted. But for those of you who have not voted yet, I just have a question. Who do you want, because we're all coming up to January, right? Who do you want at the helm of the United States when the mandates and the regulations from this meeting are implemented? Who do you want? Do you want Joe Biden, who 2 days before President Trump was inaugurated in 2017, Joe Biden's last speech as the Vice President of the United States was at the World Economic Forum, and his whole speech was devoted to protecting the liberal international order? or the New World Order, the world government? Protecting our relationship with them, the United States. Do you want that? Or do you want somebody at the helm that is saying, that's not going to be implemented here. We're America first, and we're only going to sign deals that are good for Americans. Who do you want at the helm, knowing about the Great Reset and what it's devoted to? Who do you want at the helm of the United States when those edicts are handed down? Just a question. So, that's the Great Reset. I'll get into some more of that if I have time. I've got a little bit more to share with you on that. But that all ties into the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. They're celebrating it this year. And I could not let this go by. A lot of things, the entrance into the Charter and the implementation of the United Nations Charter happened on October 23rd, 1945. So just within the last few days, they're celebrating the 75th anniversary of that. Well, what are we talking about here? The socialistic New World Order. The New World Order, simply the world government, and it's not just any world government. It's the world government of the Antichrist. This is the world government that's being formed right now and is prophesied about in the Bible. And I'm going to go through this today because many of you know this, but you need to be able to understand what's going on here. How does it tie in this Great Reset with this New World Order, the world government? A lot of people don't understand that. I taught a Bible study in New York. I had a lady that worked at the United Nations and didn't understand anything about a world government. I think she worked in the bookstore. Once she found out, she didn't want to go back to work. And I said, hey, that's between you and your boss and the Lord. But she worked at the United Nations and didn't understand anything about world government. So I'm going to go through this lesson today real quick because many of you need to hear it again and again. The term New World Order, it's on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. Pull out a dollar bill right now, if you have one. Look on the back of it. Look at the pyramid with the all-seeing eye. You'll find written in the ribbon below the pyramid, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. It's the Latin term. The word novus means new. World means ordo or order. And the word seclorum means secular or world. New World Order on the back of your dollar bill. So this plan did not start yesterday. It's been happening. It's been in the works for decades. People have been working meticulously to get this thing created. U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, he placed the term Novus or New World Order on the dollar bill back in 1935. 1935, everybody. Coming up to 100 years now. Roosevelt dreamed of building a one-world government system, and he was the driving force behind the establishment of the United Nations in 1945. You say, but he was a U.S. president. I totally understand that. But many of them have been pro-world government. He's not the only one. So, the New World Order, what is that? After World War II, the United States led the efforts to create this New World Order, and for the last 7+ decades have been one of the principal drivers. Every administration since the founding of the United Nations, here in America, whether Republican or Democrat, has fully supported the New World Order. You say, well, no, not the Bushes. They were Republican. They're from Texas. No, I'm telling you, both of the Bushes supported world government. George H.W. Bush was the one that came out talking about the New World Order. He said, we will have a world government, or the New World Order, and when we are successful, and we will be, he said. So he's the one who came out talking about it. So whether Republican or Democrat, we still were moving in that direction all the way since 1945. Over the last, 75 years now, the world has looked to America for leadership in the implementation of this New World Order agenda. And until recently, until President Trump was elected, We have been the leader of not just the United Nations or NATO, but of all the multilateral institutions designed to govern the planet. However, Bible prophecy foretells a completely different political atmosphere in the end time. You know that the United States is going to pull out of that. It's all in Bible prophecy, and I'm not going to spend time on that. I want to get through the New World Order today because it ties directly in with this great reset that they're trying to implement in January of 2021. That's when they're going to come out with the plan. So according to the prophecies, there's going to be a world government established just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ, but the United States will not be in full compliance with its agenda. So this prophesied world government, what are we talking about? 650 years before John wrote the book of Revelation, the prophet Daniel was given 4 beasts that represented kingdoms or nations that would exist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. And the 4 beasts described in Daniel 7, 4 through 7, and the modern nations that they symbolize are a lion with eagle's wings, Great Britain and the United States, a bear, Russia, 4-headed leopard, Germany, and a 10-horned beast, which is symbolic of the reborn Holy Roman Empire or the current European Union. Now, this is Prophecy 101. This is the foundational lesson. It's our first lesson of our Understanding the End Time 1 through 14. Modern nations in the Bible. You have to get Daniel 7 right. If you get that off, Clarence Larkin got it off. The original writer of the Dispensational Truth book, he was off. So in Daniel 7, he got it off. Everything he put on top of that foundation was off. But if you can get Daniel 7 right, then when you get over to Revelation, it's really easy to figure out Revelation 13, Revelation 17, and 18, all about the world government, the alliance with the world religion and the world government. It's easy to see all that stuff. So we're talking about the New World Order, is world government, and the Great Reset that's coming up here in January, the plan that they're going to roll out. We'll see what all happens in January.
Move Mountains with Irvin Baxter. This book by Irvin's grandson provides 30 days of devotion that will enhance your relationship with God and others. Authentic illustrations from early morning devotions at Endtime will help you find your purpose and eliminate fears. Commit to taking this 30-day journey and experience real life change. Get your book for only $14.99. Call 1-800-363-8463 or go to endtime.com/move.
I have left a piece of my heart in Israel and her people. We would like to thank Endtime for doing such an awesome job with our Israel tour. We marvel at your team keeping the time schedule, keeping everyone comfortable, the wonderful driver, the brilliant guide, the entire tour program, good hotel choices, and stellar food. We had the privilege to rub shoulders with Pastor Baxter, listen to his current teachings, and had some interesting questions answered so eloquently. He is wonderful. Helene from Australia.
Experience the Holy Land in the most amazing way. Join Irvin and Judy Baxter for our upcoming Israel tour. For more information, go to endtime.com or call 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the archive button.
So those are the modern nations mentioned in the Bible back in Daniel chapter 7. Well, when you jump over to Revelation chapter 13, John uses the same symbols of nations to describe the end-time world government. In John's account, the 4 separate nations of Daniel 7 have federalized into one large global governing body. It's the 7-headed, 10-horned beast at that point. Remember, there were 4 separate beasts in Daniel 7. Now they've federalized. It's a combo beast. Revelation 13, 1 through 2 says, John said, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea. I saw this beast, one singular beast, not 4 beasts, one singular beast, rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Upon his horns, or symbolizing the current European Union, were 10 crowns. Upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the singular beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, Germany, feet as the feet of the bear, Russia, mouth as the mouth of the lion, Great Britain, and the dragon, or Satan, gave him his power, seat, and his great authority. So, this is the 2,000-year-old prophecy of the world government that is currently being established. Now, the one world government. This combo beast of Revelation 13 represents this end-time world government of the Antichrist. Revelation 13, 1 through 8, describes both the world government and its leader, the Antichrist. Well, modern day, the United Nations is the only structure that is specifically designed to be a one world governing system. The words, when you hear these, you hear them all the time in the news. Globalization, New World Order, liberal international order, global governance, a global political authority. The popes will always, back from the early 60s, have called for a global political authority. All of these are synonymous terms for world government. When somebody says, hey, we need a global political authority, they're calling for a world government. So, Revelation 13:2 tells us the dragon gave this combo beast his power, seat, and great authority. Revelation 12:9 explains that the dragon is that old serpent, the devil, and Satan. So, Satan will give this end-time world government its power, seat, and great authority. The one world government, the globalization process, and the New World Order that is forming right now is of the devil. Satan is inspiring it. It is not a good thing at all. This meeting that's going to happen here at the World Economic Forum, trying to push us more towards the left, more towards this socialistic mindset, that's of Satan. It's Satan's effort. That's why the propaganda of human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, it's a lie, everybody. But Satan is fine with that because he's a liar. He's the father of liars. So he's okay. That's why there's so much corruption in government. All of this Hunter Biden and the laptops and all this other stuff, it's corruption. It's dirty. I mean, but yet that's government. Those things, those deals are being made behind closed doors. It's corruption. Satan's behind all of this. God's not behind it. There is a spirit that's pushing it, and it's Satan. The Bible says, Revelation 13:2, the dragon give this world governing body its seat, power, and great authority. God's never going to be behind a deal that is not above board and something you can trust and that there's no lies told. When God's behind it, it's a good deal for everybody. So in this New World Order, I cannot go through the New World Order without talking about Alger Hiss, because it tells so much about what the goals are behind this world government. At the end of World War II, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt, they came together at Yalta in an effort to end all war. And it was during these meetings that the charter for the concept of this global government structure called the United Nations was written. Well, there was a very key American individual who was responsible for the formation of the United Nations. His name was Alger Hiss. Now, his name is never mentioned at the United Nations today, even though he was basically the architecture for it, the architect. But he organized the American delegation, and he also served as the acting Secretary General at the very first United Nations meeting. But you'll never see his picture in the line of Secretary Generals at the United Nations. No way. You ask us, one of the guides at the United Nations, who was Alger Hiss? I don't have a clue. Well, why? There's a good reason for that. Hiss had also served on the steering committee and the executive committees and was charged with the responsibility of actually writing the charter. He was the architect for it. But after playing such a dominant role in the development of the UN Charter And he was at the founding conference. Well, 3 years later, Alger Hiss was convicted in U.S. courts of lying to cover his activities as a communist spy. The statute of limitations had run out. They couldn't convict him for that, but they got him for perjury, for covering up, for lying about being a communist spy. And he was the architect of the Charter of the United Nations, folks. He was a communist spy. Are you hearing me? So Alger Hiss designed the United Nations to be a global union of socialist republics. The emblem of the Soviet Union is a globe with 2 sheaves of wheat around it and the hammer and sickle superimposed. The emblem of the United Nations is also a globe with 2 olive branches around it, with the insignia of the United Nations. When the insignia of the United Nations was designed, the hammer and sickle was left off, obviously because that would have been too obvious, right? I mean, people would have said, hey, this is communism. But they left that off. However, Alger Hiss designed the structure of the United Nations to ultimately become a world socialistic government. So, the United Nations is totally on board with the World Economic Forum and this Great Reset, which was wanting us to lean towards socialism. They say it's stakeholder capitalism, right? But it's socialist leaning. And they don't care what they call it as long as they get their goals implemented and they reach their goals. So, Alger Hiss went to prison, but the United Nations continued to be a structure for the one world governing system. So the next thing I need to tell you about as we go through here, many of you all have been through this lesson, but the healing of the deadly wound. Let me just touch on that because it was so miraculous. Revelation 13:3 says, and I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. This is not referring to the Antichrist. We get questions about that all the time. The Antichrist is going to be wounded with a sword and die, and then he's going to come back to life. That's not what this is referring to. That's why you need to understand Daniel chapter 7. Once you understand that those beasts represent nations, then when you get to Revelation 13, this is all pretty easy to figure out. So, I want you to remember, the 7 heads on the 7-headed 10-horned beast represent nations. So, there was one of the head, one for the head of the lion, one for the head of the bear, 4 heads for the leopard, and one of the 10-horned beast. So, the Bible says one of the heads was wounded nigh to death. Which of these heads or nations was the one that was wounded to death? Well, Revelation chapter 3. Revelation 13, verse 3 says that one of the nations will be wounded, and when the wound is healed, this is very key, when that wound is healed, all the world will advocate for a world governing structure. All the world will wonder after a beast. That's what the Bible says. Well, on August 14th, 1961, let's talk about the wound. The Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall. Many people referred to it as a wound. It was a 29-mile wall that divided East Berlin and West Berlin. You guys have seen movies on it. You've heard about it in history, the Berlin Wall, the symbol of the Cold War. Well, they also established the Iron Curtain, and they placed lookout points, checkpoint Charlies all down through there, all the way throughout Europe. And they separated Eastern Europe from Western Europe. So when we're referring to the healing of the deadly wound, and we say that the deadly wound was the Berlin Wall, you kind of get an idea where I'm going, right? But Irvin was trying to figure this out. Irvin Baxter was trying to figure this out years ago, 52, 53 years ago. And he saw an article by George W. Ball. He was the Deputy Secretary of State for the United States at that time. He wrote an article in the March 29th, 1968 edition of Life magazine. I was born in 1968, so that gives you an idea how far back. It was, a few years ago. But the article was titled 3.5 Superpowers to Rule the World. In the article, he stated that somehow we've got to find a new global structure or a world governing body that could rid rid the world of these terrible conflicts that threaten to blow up all of mankind, or nuclear weapons is what they were talking about. Atom bombs, nuclear weapons, all these things that could destroy mankind. Well, in that article, George W. Ball mentioned Germany and the division of Europe and the Iron Curtain, and in particular, the division of Germany and the Berlin Wall. On page 89, he referred to the wound, and he said where the division that festers like a rusty knife wound must someday be healed. Well, back in 1968, Irvin Baxter was studying this, and while he was seeking God's direction, because God had been showing, kind of revealing some prophecies and opening up his mind to these things, and he thought about Revelation 13, one of the heads, and that was wounded nigh unto death. The wound would be healed, and that would be the catalyst that would launch us into the New World Order. So he concluded the head that was wounded was the Third Reich, after the Germany after the World War II. In other words, it wasn't Charlemagne or Otto von Bismarck, the First and Second Reich. It had to have been Hitler's, because the Fourth Reich is now rising. So it was through much prayer and study that Irvin Baxter started teaching back from what the prophecies in the Bible back in 1968, that the Berlin Wall would come down, and when that happened, it would be the beginning of the new world order. Well, he taught that from 1968 until 1986. And it was then that he published his first book, A Message for the President. And he included all of that information, including that the Berlin Wall would be torn down. Now, the Berlin Wall would be torn down. That would be the catalyst that would launch us into the New World Order. No one believed him. No one. His friends were like, Irvin, don't teach that. You're going to ruin your credibility. Nobody's going to have you teach. You're going to ruin your ministry. Don't put it in black and white. Don't put it in a book. Don't teach that, because the Berlin Wall's never coming down. Don't quit teaching that. And so he said, look, it's in the prophecies of the Bible. God's wanting me to write this book. So he published it in his book in 1986, A Message for the President. Well, 3 years later, on November 9th, 1999, the Berlin Wall came down, everybody. And Irvin said, look, the only way I knew all of this, everybody started calling him. How'd you know that? He said, the only way I knew this is from a revelation from God, and all of the information was located in the prophecies of the Bible. A total miracle, everybody.
Most of us walk around day by day blind to the prophecies being fulfilled right before us. Every news report brings a new piece to the puzzle in the race towards the final 7 years and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Now, more than ever, it is important for God's people to understand the times in which we are living. On November the 12th, 2013, we opened our Jerusalem Prophecy College in downtown Jerusalem. These same courses are now available online for people who are unable to attend the classes in person. We welcome students to join us and discover the link between current events and the prophecies of the Bible. Take your place in the prophecy of Daniel 11:33. Enroll in the Jerusalem Prophecy College today. Go to JerusalemProphecyCollege.com.
Isn't it awesome to understand and know the prophecies of the Bible? I mean, think of it. 2,000 years ago, Revelation 13 called the division of the third head of the leopard the wound that just won't heal. And it was a deadly wound. But the deadly wound was healed. What happened when the deadly wound was healed? The New World Order was birthed. And it happened really quick. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, Mikhail Gorbachev, George Herbert Walker Bush Pope John Paul II, within 20 days of the fall of the Berlin Wall. They met together in Malta. When they came out of those meetings, they announced the birth of the New World Order. It's exactly like the prophecy said it would occur. And in January 16th, 91, the Berlin Wall came down in 89. In January 16th, 1991, President George H.W. Bush stated this. He made a speech. He said, "We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the rule of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations." He says, when we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use a peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise of the visions of the UN founders. The UN founders, Alger Hiss, a communist spy? Think about this, everybody. In Time magazine, 92, Mr. Strobe Talbot stated in his article, The Birth of the Global Nation, that in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we know it would cease to exist. We would all answer to a single global authority, a world government. Remember, when I talked about anybody's talking about a global public authority or a global authority, world government, they're all synonymous terms. And, of course, Strobe Talbot worked for a liberal internationalist. Who was that? Bill Clinton. He believed in a world government. All these guys. So, as a result of this, global elites have been for decades working assiduously to create a world governing body. The outcomes of these efforts, you see them every day in the news. It's the formation of international institutions designed to govern the planet. You'll recognize many of these organizations: the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, International Criminal Court, World Bank, World Health Organization, World Trade Organization, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's just to name a few. There are hundreds of them. And it's also going to be a socialist world government, and that's where we come right back to the Great Reset, leaning towards socialism. A socialist world government, Revelation 17:3, it tells us that the end-time world government will be a socialistic entity. John, the angel, was talking to John, and it said, "John, I'm going to show you the judgment of the great harlot, this world religious system." The Bible says in Revelation 17:3, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit on a scarlet-colored beast full of names and blasphemy, and the beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. Who's the 7-headed, 10-horned beast? That's the world government. And here it gives another clue. The color of this world government, red. Of course, the red ideology from Scripture, from other Scriptures and other prophecies, in the end time will be communistic or socialistic. From its inception, the United Nations was designed to be a socialistic one world governing body. Again, the original UN Charter was written by a communist spy, Alger Hiss. And he was later revealed to be a communist spy. They didn't know it at that point. But to this day, guess what? Not one word of the original charter has ever changed. So, why do you think most of the worlds are socialistic leaning? Most of the nations of the world? Because the United Nations is socialistic. One of the main planks of socialism is wealth redistribution. Remember what I said about in the Great Reset, that the founder of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, he actually talked about in the Great Reset, this is not just about wealth redistribution. He didn't say it wasn't about wealth redistribution. He said this is not just about that. This is all socialistic leaning. In the United Nations Global Governing Plan, Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, under subtitle New Agenda, it actually says, and I'm quoting, this agenda will only be possible if wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. You understand, wealth redistribution is theft. When you're going to go in from somebody and you say, hey, you've got too much money, we're going to take from you and give to those that have not, who weren't willing to take the risk you did and build a big business or whatever. That's theft, everybody. You can't just go in and take people's money. But there are people that in this world governing globalistic ideology that think that, yeah, we can do that. And so you have, they say that in their 2030 agenda, it's not going to be possible unless wealth is shared and income inequality is addressed. The 2030 agenda is nothing more than the United Nations socialistic blueprint to govern the planet. Socialism. Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the United Nations, was president of the Socialist International from 1999 to 2005. Prior to that, he had also been the Socialist International Vice President from 92 and 1999, as well as the chair of the Socialist International Committee on Economic Policy, Development, and Environment. So this guy is a socialist. President Obama allowed him to be installed as a Secretary General of the United Nations, along with the other nations. And so socialism is the political ideology of the international community. And socialism is the political ideology of the United Nations. And socialism is the political ideology of the Great Reset. Now, I told you early on that Time magazine devoted an entire issue to the Great Reset. Time magazine, in the article, The Great Reset, Back to Home, they gave a scenario where they went to the year 2023 and they said, okay, here's how we have fixed the global economy. And they kind of play off of a, they kind of sketch it out and write it, how it's already year 2023. And they look back and they say, okay, here's how we've done it. And they give a scenario, how in their mind it could all play out to when we get to 2023, they've solved everything. And what they say, and I'm quoting from the article, they say, hey, this is year 2023. The COVID-19 pandemic has come to an end, and the global economy is on the path to recovery. How did we get here? How did our economy and society evolve to overcome the greatest crisis of our age? So now they're saying, hey, we moved off climate change. Now it's the COVID situation. So they say, and I'm quoting, the U.S. began to change its approach after the November 3rd, 2020 election when Joe Biden defeated Trump. So they see that in solving this, they predict Joe Biden defeated President Trump on November 3rd in the presidential election, and the Democrats held the majority in both houses of Congress following his inauguration on January 2021. So that's all I'm going to give you from the article. You can go get the Time magazine, read it all, but I'm just saying, they say, hey, we're in 2023, and the way we've solved this is Joe Biden was installed as president November 3rd, 2020. And then they give this big scenario how because of what he's done, we moved back into partnership with all of our overseas people. We started working together, all of our allies overseas, and I say quote-unquote allies. I mean, when somebody hammers you in a trade deal, are they really your ally? But you got to read some of these articles. The Time magazine, it's devoted to the Great Reset. Well, Breitbart ran an article from Justin Haskins, and it said that Biden is echoing the Davos agenda of the Great Reset of capitalism. Now, this goes back to my question. I described the Great Reset and what it's all about. Socialist leaning, I mean, the United Nations socialistic leaning. Number one, do we want socialism here in America? You got to ask yourself that. There was just an interview with Kamala Harris, and she was saying, she was asked, do you think you will pull Trump, or not Trump, do you think you will pull Joe Biden into some of your socialistic ideologies that you have. And she was like, huh? Started laughing and said, well, I mean, you know, Joe Biden doesn't agree with you on everything, and are you going to try to pull him? She said, well, I never would have got on this if I didn't agree with his platform. And it was just kind of an eerie feeling about some of the things that she might pull Joe Biden into, socialistic leaning things. Well, it's come to the point, I may not get through all of this, but where Joe Biden has actually talked about doing away with the shareholder model of capitalism. I'm like, this is what the Great Reset's all about. And Joe Biden has talked about this. So in the article, they say, hey, the Great Reset is a sort of like Agenda 21 on steroids. Essentially, it's the global movement among some of the most powerful leaders in the government, business, and in activism all over the world to push the reset button on the entire global economy and replace it with something that's called stakeholder capitalism, which is essentially socialism. The Great Reset is an attempt to rebrand socialist ideology with a capitalism name on it. Well, then The Blaze had a commentary, and I know I'm not going to get through all this. I wish I had a little more time, but The Blaze ran an article, Glenn Beck's The Blaze, and it's commentary, and it says Joe Biden has deep ties to the radical Great Reset movement and its globalist leaders. I've actually heard there's a video out where Joe Biden is calling for doing away with shareholder capitalism. Why would the President of the United States be against something that has built us to the most powerful economically, military nation on the planet? Why would we want to move off of that? Because stakeholder capitalism allows more governmental influence in our society. We don't want that. That would bankrupt America. If the government gets involved and there's so much regulation put on businesses, I know that many of you own businesses. How would you like the government to have more influence over your business, more regulation, and telling you what to do with the business that you built by yourself? How would you like that? The government to come in. Most of those people have never run a business ever. That's why it's been so successful with President Trump in there. Because he was a businessman. He ran a business. He had 10,000s of employees. And so that's why the economy took off like a rocket. But that's kind of what we're dealing with. I'm coming up to an end here. I'm sorry, but you got to go to The Blaze, read the article on Joe Biden and the Great Reset. You got to go read some of this stuff. It's very, very important you understand, because most people are not even paying attention to this. But it's called the Great Reset. It's by the World Economic Forum. They're going to roll out the plan in January 2021. I will be all over it, I promise you, and I'll keep you up to date. God bless.
This has been End of the Age, brought to you by the faithful partners of Endtime Ministries. If you're not currently a partner with Endtime Ministries, or if you would like more information, we invite you to call us at 1-800-ENDTIME. That's 1-800-363-8463, or visit us online at endtime.com.
Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel and like our Facebook page.